we are meeting. Welcome to the February 2011 meeting of the Federal Communications Commission. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to recognize a beloved member of the FCC staff, Anita Chang, who passed away just last week, January 31st, after a courageous battle with cancer. Anita was an extraordinary person who worked very closely with so many people at the FCC. She was known by all as a wonderful, generous person with not only a brilliant intellect, but with a warm spirit and an incredibly positive attitude every day, even through her illness, when she continued to work at the FCC, maintain her friendships, participate in all the activities here at the agency. Anita she'd been at the FCC since 1995 when she joined the Wireline Bureau's predecessor as part of the honors program. She's worked at the commission in several roles over the years, always working hard, always committed to doing the right thing, always working on behalf of the American people. She was the original author of the FCC's Truth in Billing Rules, and over the course of her time here at the FCC, worked on a variety of USF matters, including Lifeline, rural health care, the major E-rate order issued in September. She worked very closely with all of the people on making our first presentation today. Anita was an inspiration to her colleagues in the Wireline Bureau and throughout the FCC. At her memorial service this weekend, literally hundreds of people attended with an overwhelming turnout from the agency, all people who knew her directly. And very sad, Anita leaves behind a husband, Michael, and two young children, Lily and Peter. On behalf of everyone at the FCC, all of the commissioners, and certainly everyone from the bureaus, I want to extend our deepest sympathies to Anita's family, friends, and colleagues as we honor her life and recognize her service at the FCC. With that, Madam Secretary, would you please introduce our agenda for this morning?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you. Good morning, Commissioners. Today's agenda includes 3 items for your consideration and 1 presentation. First, you will consider an item to get broadband to all of rural America and spur infrastructure investment and job creation by modernizing the Universal Service Fund and Intercarrier compensation system while cutting waste and inefficiency. Second, you will hear a presentation on the status of the comprehensive reform efforts to improve the agency's fact-based, data-driven decision-making. Third, you will consider a notice of proposed rulemaking initiated as part of the Commission's Data Innovation Initiative to streamline and modernize the collection of data via Form 477 in order to ensure that the data the Commission collects enables informed policymaking while minimizing burdens on voice and broadband service providers. For your 4th and final item, you will consider a notice of proposed rulemaking initiated as part of the Commission's Data Innovation Initiative to eliminate the legacy, narrowband, comparably efficient interconnection, and open network architecture reporting requirements that currently apply to the Bell operating companies due to a lack of continuing relevance and utility. This is your agenda for today. The first item will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau and the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. Sharon Gillette, Chief of the Wireline Competition Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Today, the Wireline Competition and Wireless Telecommunications Bureaus are pleased to present a proposal for fundamental reform of the Commission's Universal Service and Intercarrier compensation policies to root out waste and inefficiency and set our nation on a fiscally responsible path towards making fixed and mobile broadband available to all Americans. recognizing that universal service funds and intercarrier compensation payments together support networks, in rural high-cost areas. This integrated notice of proposed rulemaking lays out a holistic approach to reform of both sets of policies. Preparing this notice involved much hard work from a large number of Commission staff whose names appear on the screen. The detailed proposals in this NPRM to reorient our universal service and intercarrier compensation policies towards broadband have been enriched by the contributions of many bureaus and offices across the agency through our USF Reform Working Group. Ruth Milkman, Chief of the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, joins us at the table. Also seated with me are key members of the WCB leadership team: Carol Maddie, Deputy Bureau Chief; Rebecca Goodhart, Associate Bureau Chief; Amy Bender, Deputy Chief of the Telecommunications Access Policy Division; Randy Clark, Acting Deputy Division Chief in the Pricing Policy Division; and Victoria Goldberg, Attorney Advisor in the Pricing Policy Division. Joe Cavender, Attorney Advisor in the Telecommunications Access Policy Division, will present the universal service portion of the item, and Randy Clark will present the proposals for intercarrier compensation reform. Joe?
This notice of proposed rulemaking proposes to transform the portion of the Universal Service Fund that provides support for telephone service in rural, insular, and high-cost areas, known as the High Cost Program. While this program has enabled some rural telephone companies to deploy broadband-capable lines, many rural areas receive insufficient support for broadband, creating a rural-rural divide. In many other areas of the country, USF provides more support than necessary to achieve our goals, subsidizes a competitor that is offering service without government assistance, or supports several networks in a single area. And there is room for improved accountability throughout the program. Consequently, this notice proposes to transform the high-cost program into a new, more efficient, and broadband-focused Connect America Fund. The NPRM proposes modernization of the fund to support broadband, fiscal responsibility, accountability, and market-driven and incentive-based policies as guiding principles for reform. While recognizing the great need for reform, the notice also acknowledges the need to provide a predictable transition path and avoid flash cuts. Additionally, the notice recognizes the critical role played by our partners in state, territorial, and tribal governments, as well as other federal agencies, and seeks comment on how to best coordinate our efforts. As shown on the screen, the notice proposes a two-stage transition process consisting of near-term and longer-term reforms. In the near term, we propose to transition selected high-cost funding to a Phase 1 Connect America Fund, which would be used to accelerate the deployment of broadband in unserved areas, and we would continue to maintain the existing rate of return framework for small telephone companies, while modifying some of the associated support mechanisms to improve incentives for efficient operation. In particular, this notice proposes the following near-term reforms. First, a set of updates to our rules governing support mechanisms originally intended for small telephone companies, including 1. Modifying reimbursement formulas which would have the effect of distributing support more equitably through the capped high-cost loop support mechanism. 2. Phasing out the local switching support mechanism, which is predicated on an outdated technology rationale. 3. Imposing limits on the total support per line any carrier operating in the continental United States can receive. And 4. Establishing reasonable benchmarks for allowable capital and operating expenses. Second, the notice proposes to transition interstate access support, or IAS, to the Connect America Fund over a period of a few years. Originally created in 2000 as an interim part of a 5-year transitional reform plan, IAS has outlived its intended lifespan. Our record to date suggests that this fund is not critical to ensuring rural voice service, and we believe the funds could be more productively used to support the deployment of broadband to unserved areas. Third, the notice proposes to eliminate the identical support rule and, over a period of years, rationalize support for competitive eligible telecommunications carriers, or CETCs, so that funding remains focused on areas that truly need support, such as tribal areas. 2 of the largest CETC recipients have already voluntarily agreed to relinquish their support. The notice seeks comment on how to best transition CETC funding to the Connect America Fund. The notice also asks whether there should be any exceptions to these proposed near-term rule changes, recognizing that not all recipients are similarly situated. The notice proposes to use savings realized from these near-term reforms to spur broadband investment through the establishment of a Connect America Fund. Phase 1 of this fund would rely on a competitive bidding process or reverse auction to award support for broadband deployment, whether wired or wireless, to unserved areas across the country. Specifically, the notice proposes to use the forthcoming National Broadband Map to identify areas that currently lack broadband service. The Commission would then hold a competitively neutral auction where bidders would compete for an infusion of support to provide broadband service to specified unserved areas. Such a process would be similar to the proposed bidding process outlined in the recently released Mobility Fund Nprm. In the longer term, the notice proposes to transition all remaining high-cost support to the Connect America Fund. This fund would provide ongoing support to maintain and advance broadband across the country in areas where it would be uneconomic to provide broadband absent such support, with voice service as an application provided over the broadband network. The notice seeks comment on several options for determining support levels under the Connect America Fund, including the use of an auction, use of a cost model, and potentially implementation of different approaches for different areas of the country. The notice also proposes a variety of measures to increase accountability, establish clear goals for the program, and better measure program performance, including improvements to reporting and audit processes. These measures will help ensure that the American public is getting its money's worth from the fund. Randy?
Thank you. Intercarrier compensation, or ICC, is a regulated federal-state system of payments between carriers for delivering phone calls. Despite dramatic shifts in technology, consumer behavior, and competition, the intercarrier payment system remains grounded in concepts from the 1980s and is overdue for an update. The notice seeks comment on a framework to comprehensively reform ICC, consistent with providing a predictable transition path and accelerating deployment of all IP networks, while also proposing near-term actions to reduce inefficiency and waste in the system. As with the transition to the Connect America Fund, our ICC proposals follow a two-stage framework, as shown on the screen. In the near term, the notice seeks comment on the proposed rules to reduce incentives for wasteful and inefficient arbitrage practices, implicating, by some estimates, hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and to establish increased certainty in ICC payments. Specifically, the notice proposes revising our interstate access rules to address access stimulation, a practice where carriers enter into revenue-sharing arrangements and offer supposedly free conferencing, chat, or similar services that result in large volumes of calls going to areas with high interstate access rates. These arrangements arise from smaller carriers whose per-minute rates can be more than 10 times higher than the rates charged by the largest carriers, resulting in the potential for significant revenues from ICC payments. The proposed rules would require incumbent and competitive carriers participating in such revenue-sharing arrangements to refile their access tariffs to reflect a lower rate more consistent with their actual traffic volumes. The notice also proposes rules to address phantom traffic, or calls that lack information to enable a terminating carrier to know which carrier to bill or what rate to apply. These calls may account for up to 8% of all traffic and divert substantial resources towards resolving billing disputes, resources that could otherwise be directed to broadband deployment. The proposed rule modifications are intended to ensure that terminating providers receive sufficient information for all voice calls to identify and bill the appropriate provider. In addition, the notice seeks comment on how to address interconnected VoIP traffic for purposes of ICC. Such determination is necessary to bring certainty to the industry. We propose two options for working in partnership with states to achieve long-term reform. Under the first option, we would work within our existing federal-state roles to reduce intercarrier charges, with the Commission responsible for the transition of interstate access rates and the states responsible for the transition of intrastate access rates. We seek comment on what incentives the Commission could provide, for example, through the Connect America Fund, for states to complete the necessary reforms. Under the second option, the Commission would interpret the reciprocal compensation framework of Section 251b5 of the Telecommunications Act as applying to all intercarrier traffic, in which case the Commission would set a methodology and the states would implement the associated transition. We seek comment on how to structure the reductions of intercarrier charges with the goal of completing the transition away from the current ICC system by the time the long-term Connect America Fund is established. The notice also seeks comment on the closely related issue of structuring a financial recovery mechanism to be established at the same time as ICC rate reductions begin, to provide certainty to the industry during the transition. We recognize that some areas of the country may need access to the Connect America Fund as part of the recovery mechanism, and we seek comment on how to do so consistent with our commitment to control the size of the fund. By modernizing our ICC policies for a broadband world and by reducing incentives for wasteful arbitrage, we believe these reforms will promote investment in IP facilities and spur innovation. The Bureau recommends adoption of this notice and requests editorial privileges.
Excellent presentation, and thank you very much. Let me ask my colleagues if they have comments. I assume they do. Commissioner Cobbs?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is our best chance yet to get from here to there with a universal service system that will truly serve the telecommunications needs of the 21st century. It's very likely our last chance for a while, too, because if we can't bring this home now with all the preparation and effort and expectation that has gone into it, we'll be left with a rickety, tottering last-century system that did good things for plain old telephone service but hasn't got a shot at taking us where we need to go in the years ahead. By now, we should all understand the importance of this. The President, the Congress, and the Commission are clearly looking to broadband infrastructure as one of the great tools to build a better and more prosperous future for America. We undertake this task with nothing less than the prosperity of our local communities, our global competitiveness, and the infrastructure for our national civic dialogue, all at stake. Whether the United States will continue to give rise to the ideas, innovations, and inventions that drive the global economy will in no small part depend upon the strength of our communications networks and on the ability of all Americans, urban and rural, to access them. Universal service is the bedrock of our national communications policy and of this Commission's enabling statute, because all of us benefit when more of us are connected. Let's keep in mind that for all its faults, the present system has accomplished a lot. Good things have come from the high-cost support mechanism. National telephone penetration stands at over 98%, although we know, and I'm pleased that this item acknowledges that some areas, such as Indian country, remain inexcusably behind. Communications infrastructure has been deployed in many rural, insular, and high-cost areas, those places where there may never be a private sector business case for broadband and high-quality voice service. Good jobs have been created. And here's something that gets too seldom mentioned. Because of our universal service mechanisms, we have less industry consolidation than we would otherwise have had in an already over-consolidated sector. But new times, new challenges, and new technologies are passing the old system by. It just hasn't had the maintenance and modernization any system needs to keep functioning. Plus, the action has moved to far more advanced telecommunications. So the chorus for reform has rightly grown loud. Yet much work remains before we are all singing off the same song sheet. Writing that song sheet is what we will be doing in the months immediately ahead. The current regime of universal service and intercarrier compensation has many moving parts and categories that can be mind-boggling in their intricacies and applications and exemptions. We must be upfront that phasing down and eliminating the inefficiencies that we all know exist in legacy mechanisms will not be easy, will not be painless. We must face the hard truth that our current system is not designed to live up to either the public interest or the dictate of the law for today's needs, ensuring access to the services all Americans require to participate fully in the digital age. We see some money, frankly, being wasted right in sight of the need for funds in unserved areas. The item before us commits to a stable and predictable framework for intercarrier compensation as we rationalize a system too often plagued with gamesmanship. We all see the symptoms of decision-making deferred, too much litigation, self-help, and market power as a substitute for the honest rules needed to minimize arbitrage, promote investment and deployment, and maximize the opportunity for new technology to flourish. The Commission must address these issues head-on, the treatment of VoIP, phantom traffic, and access stimulation, to name only the most obvious. Because many providers' current business models, and ultimately the consumers they serve, rely on today's outdated system, our Commission must move quickly from the proposals teed up in today's item to a real roadmap. Industry and consumers will benefit from the certainty of mile markers guiding us along the way to reform. We won't complete the transition right away, but we have an obligation to complete the transition plan this year. This is why I have been talking about, and I appreciate working with my colleagues on this, a series of workshops between the FCC and all stakeholders, and no one is more stakeholder than the public who will be living with the results. And my hope is that participants would come prepared to put on the table their final best and considered thoughts on the shape of our decisions, cognizant that Commission decisions and votes were imminent and that everyone will have to sacrifice a little so the country can gain a lot. These sessions would take place as soon as possible after all stakeholders have had an opportunity to submit written comments on today's item so that we can have an open and transparent discussion on the eve of Commission votes, which I am hoping and expecting will take place this year, 2011. That means a final transition plan and necessary formative orders. To truly reshape our universal service and intercarrier comp policies to meet our national broadband goals will require a commitment to shared sacrifice and an ability to rise above the clamor for whatever piece of the status quo has been beneficial to any one private interest. I have served at the Commission through many iterations and attempts at reform. While we have resolved some discrete issues and made some adjustments, comprehensive reform is what is required to make it across the finish line, and that's going to demand more from each and every one of us. Today's item certainly does not lack for questions, and if there are more questions that stakeholders think of, I hope they will tee them up and respond with their thoughts in this record. Our inquiry also needs to expand beyond the important considerations about how to distribute efficient and targeted support for broadband to include how to assess the contributions necessary to put the Universal Service Fund on solid footing for the future. Recognizing that consumers ultimately bear the burden, equity would suggest that a fund that distributes support for broadband ought to require those same services to contribute. The $4.3 billion in annual high-cost funding is obviously key to our broadband build-out, but it is unlikely to be the total bill for bringing total high-speed telecommunications to every citizen in every corner of the land in sufficient time to keep America fully productive and globally competitive. Extending world-class communications infrastructure across the length and breadth of the country isn't something that's going to be done on the cheap. Universal service will be a large part of the solution. It may not be the whole solution. I also look forward to further final action to implement the Mobility Fund. We have started down the road on this already, realizing that setting up and running the reverse auctions proposed in that item will provide an important test drive for the proposals, both interim and long-term, that we contemplate here for the Connect America Fund. Modernizing our low-income support mechanisms to support broadband must also be a top priority, and the Federal-State Joint Board has already issued recommendations and identified key issues in the Lifeline and Link-Up programs, and I anticipate action soon on that agenda. And we have certainly made impressive progress toward making sure E-rate is able to fulfill its maximum potential going forward. a stellar performer in the past, E-Rate is going to deliver equally amazing results in the years ahead. Finally, it is imperative that we work closely with our state colleagues as partners in this transition, and I welcome Randy's comments on that. You have heard me speak many times before about this, so I won't belabor it here, but I believe the Telecommunications Act of 1996 envisioned a level of federal-state cooperation in implementing the statute that has not yet been achieved. Maybe we can achieve it here. I hope so. So I look forward to a fast pace as we set out to win this race together. I want to thank the several bureaus who have been working so hard for so long on preparing this item. It's a wonderful example, Mr. Chairman, of intra-FCC cooperation and inter-bureau cooperative work. It's great. My thanks to the Chairman for putting this front and center with a commitment to action soon. Thanks to our 8th floor staffs for their many contributions to the proceeding, and of course to all of my esteemed colleagues who share a commendable desire to get on with this job and actually finish it. Today, as I vote to approve this notice of proposed rulemaking, I do so with more confidence than ever in my nearly 10 years here that this is a job that can finally get done. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Copps. Commissioner McDowell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 15 years ago today, President Clinton signed into law the landmark Telecommunications Act of 1996. It took almost 12 years for Congress to pass that legislation, but when it did, it garnered overwhelming bipartisan support. For you political junkies out there, it passed the Senate 91-5 and the House 414-16. A key component of that legislation is Section 254, which outlines broad powers and duties for the FCC to structure the Universal Service Subsidy Program. The Act also defined our authority to modernize our complex intercarrier compensation rules. The Universal Service Fund's original mission was to make traditional, analog, circuit-switched voice service available and affordable to as many Americans as possible. Congress also called upon the Commission, however, to ensure that we refine the program from time to time to ensure affordable access to advanced services. In the fall of 2008, 4 commissioners, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, myself included, agreed in principle on many fundamental reforms of the Universal Service and Intercarrier compensation regimes. Unfortunately, 4 votes were not sufficient to carry the day. Nonetheless, I remain optimistic that the 5 of us can rekindle that positive and constructive spirit as we take the first steps on the next segment of this very long journey. As I have said since I first arrived here at the Commission, the Universal Service Fund's growth from $4.9 billion in 2000 to over $8 billion in 2010 is troubling. Equally problematic has been the unbridled growth of the contribution factor. In its early stages in 1998, this tax to support the fund, which is derived ultimately from consumers, stood at 5.53% of interstate revenues. Today, that tax rate skyrocketed to an all-time high of more than 15% last year. As with many government programs in general, the trends on both the spending and the taxing sides of this equation are simply unsustainable. As a 21st century program, the Universal Service Fund should evolve away from subsidizing inefficient 20th century systems and support the efficiencies of current technologies as brought about by competitive pressures. As I've stated many times over the years, my first priority has always been to restore fiscal responsibility to this program. Accordingly, I've long advocated for comprehensive reform of the entire Universal Service and Intercarrier compensation regimes. It's like fixing a watch. It's impossible to tinker with one component of the mechanism without affecting all of its parts at the same time. Today, the Commission is choosing to take the piecemeal route again by not addressing the contribution mechanism at the same time. While not ideal, in my view, piecemeal reform is better than no reform at all. As such, I commend the Chairman for taking on this complex but important effort. I also thank him for his willingness to work with all of his colleagues to achieve consensus today and going forward. As we go forward, I will work to ensure that we contain the growth of the fund, or preferably reduce the size of the fund. And when I refer to the size of the fund, I mean the entire Universal Service Fund, not just the high-cost program which we address in this proposed rulemaking. It would not be fiscally responsible if the FCC found savings in one universal service program, such as the high-cost fund, but then expanded other universal service programs. In the same vein, as technology offers consumers more efficiencies resulting in reduced costs, I challenge my colleagues to work toward actually reducing the size of the fund over time to reflect the savings brought about by competition and innovation. Ultimately, competition supplants any ostensible need for regulation and subsidies. In that spirit, I'm delighted that we are seeking comment on ways to transition to market-driven policies, such as exploring reverse auctions. Of course, to undertake serious universal service reform, the Commission must have the legal authority to do so. As such, I'm pleased that this notice asks for comment on our statutory authority to support broadband with universal service funds. My opinion is that the Commission does have such authority through Section 254. In Section 254B, Congress specified that, quote, the Joint Board and the Commission shall base policies for the preservation and advancement of universal service on certain principles, end quote. Two of those principles are particularly instructive. First, under Section 254B2, Congress sets forth the principle that, quote, access to advanced telecommunications and information services should be provided in all regions of the nation, end quote. Second, with Section 254B3, Congress established the principle that, quote, consumers in all regions of the nation, including low-income consumers and those in rural, insular, and high-cost areas, should have access to telecommunications and information services, end quote. If other language appears to be ambiguous, it is ambiguous in a classic Chevron deference sense, and the Commission's reasonable interpretation of it would be upheld by the courts. I'm concerned, however, that some lobbying groups are pushing for us to impose Internet network management conditions on recipients of universal service funds. Such policies are unnecessary and would be actually counterproductive. In sum, all stakeholders, especially American consumers, should be on notice that the five of us are determined to go forward with honest reform as soon as possible. While today marks the beginning of the latest installment of the Universal Service and Intercarrier Compensation saga, we will do all that we can to write the last chapter with great haste and care. I look forward to working with my colleagues, members of Congress, and all stakeholders on these issues. Consensus can and should be found this time around. Finally, many thanks to the legions of dedicated professionals in both the wireline and wireless bureaus for your seemingly endless hours of work on this notice. You have done an outstanding job. Take your vitamins and get some rest tonight, because we're going to need your hard work going forward to bring this home. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In order to fully participate and succeed in our 21st century economy, all citizens, no matter where they live, must have access to broadband technology. Most of us in this room take for granted the presence of high-speed internet access in our homes, but many regions in our nation, there are consumers who are not so fortunate. I still hear stories of the persistent digital divide in our country and the significant disadvantages citizens face without broadband service. For example, just last week, I learned of two more stories that highlight the need for universal service reform. In the small Texas town of Von Ormy, a young woman who had been out of work for 3 months missed a job opportunity because her town has no reliable high-speed internet service or even dependable wireless phone reception. Only by traveling 17 miles to San Antonio and staying with friends was she able to receive emails from a potential employer and complete the employer's application requirements at a local library. Still another situation involved a high school student who was forced to actually spend the night in a library to complete a writing assignment, as his home had no reliable high-speed internet service. These are real stories and real people who do not question the power of broadband, but right now they are unable to access it at home. As such, I fully agree with my fellow commissioners that the Universal Service Fund must be reformed to bring the benefits of broadband to the millions of Americans who lack access to a high-speed network where they live. The step we take today in adopting this notice of proposed rulemaking builds upon the work we began immediately after the release of the National Broadband Plan, reforming the Universal Service Fund in order to provide a meaningful opportunity for every American to benefit from the broadband communications era is an action consistent with the principles Congress set forth in Section 254 of the Communications Act to ensure that all Americans have access to affordable voice and advanced communications services. While the Universal Service Fund has been instrumental in providing affordable telephone service to millions of Americans, it has not been as effective in ensuring that advanced services reach all American homes. Indeed, it is apparent that the current structure of the high-cost mechanism of the fund has led to the support of multiple providers and networks rather than focusing on the mission Congress gave to us to ensure quality voice and advanced services at just, reasonable, and affordable rates in rural, insular, and high-cost areas. Moreover, it is also apparent that we cannot be certain that our financial support of communications networks is being prudently used by providers to achieve these goals. Accordingly, it is imperative that we move expeditiously to reform the high-cost mechanisms to address the broadband needs of our country and ensure that support is used efficiently for both voice and broadband services available and affordable in all areas of our nation. As a commissioner from a rural state, I know how important it is that citizens have access to the same critical communication services, both wireline and wireless, in rural areas as they do in urban areas, and that such services are comparable and affordable. Without modern communication services, the economic survivability of rural areas is in jeopardy. Large and small businesses must have access to broadband to compete in our global economy, and rural areas especially must have broadband in order to keep and attract employers who can help sustain and grow their economies. I have listened closely to numerous stakeholders and understand that many companies, their employees, and families are currently relying upon USF support to provide services in their local communities. I recognize the need for a careful balance and of providing adequate time for entities to adjust to any proposed transition while we effectuate the necessary changes required to ensure that we realize as many benefits as possible from the Universal Service Fund. Service providers and investors must and will have time to adjust so that all providers can make the migration successfully. We must ensure that areas currently served by wireline or wireless providers that would not be served but for Universal Service Fund support continue to receive their service. At the same time, however, we must ask each company's help in identifying and eliminating inefficiencies so that the fund can benefit more consumers. As communications technologies evolve, so too must the entire framework that ensures that our nation is fully connected. As such, it is not sufficient to solely focus on the Universal Service Fund. We must also consider the necessary changes to the Intercarrier compensation regime. The communications marketplace has changed dramatically, and Intercarrier compensation revenues have decreased significantly. The implicit subsidies that have been used to support networks have eroded, and we have every reason to believe that they will continue to do so as more communications move to broadband networks. Such uncertainty and instability should be addressed simultaneously with USF reform. I am sympathetic to industry's concerns that there are immediate issues in the ICC regime that should be addressed, and I want to work with my fellow commissioners on these issues in a timely fashion. I also want to encourage industry to work with us on developing both immediate and long-term solutions rather than start new disputes about intercarrier compensation based on the notice's proposals. Such disputes detract from the industry's ability to engage in a productive dialogue and for us to achieve consensus on these difficult issues. As a commission, we should be open to new ideas and experiment with new approaches in response to changes in technology and the marketplace. But we must remain mindful of our duty to achieve the fundamental goals of universal service and not harm the success we have already achieved. As such, we must carefully consider whether new approaches to providing support require certain conditions that may not be achievable in those geographic areas where few have ventured to serve without financial assistance from the fund and the ICC regime. It is my hope that we carefully test the effectiveness of the new disbursement mechanisms before applying them to address the needs of all high-cost areas. In fact, from my travels across the country, including to some of the hardest-to-serve areas in our nation, a one-size-fits-all approach will not achieve the goals of universal service. The comprehensive nature of this notice, along with a number of detailed questions and alternative proposals, underscores the complexity of reform for a nation that is so vast and geographically diverse. This notice will afford all interested parties the chance to demonstrate which proposals will offer the most immediate benefits of both voice and broadband services as to many Americans as possible. I believe that input from all stakeholders, providers, legislators, state regulators, RUST, and consumers are critical as we consider the proposals for reform. Given the historical partnership this Commission has had with the states in providing universal service, as recognized in Section 254 of the Act, I am pleased that we are seeking specific input from our state members of the Federal-State Joint Board on Universal Service with respect to the proposals in the notice. Further, I am pleased that throughout this notice, we ask specific questions concerning the state's role and the possible reform options. We must proceed in a thoughtful way to make sure that we are preserving the current availability of voice and broadband services to consumers while expanding the availability of broadband service to unserved areas. I believe that having state input will assist us in that endeavor, and I encourage state commissioners and consumer advocates to provide their counsel in this proceeding. The task before us is not easy. If it were, it would have been done long ago. It is my hope, however, that this commission and industry will help find a solution so that we can do what is required to reform the Universal Service Fund and the Intercarrier compensation regime and make available both voice and affordable broadband services to all American homes. Next week, my state colleagues on the Joint Board will be in this very room conducting a workshop on these issues and presenting some of their own ideas for reform. The next step in our work is to listen to our state colleagues, industry, consumers, and other interested parties. I want to also thank my good friend and fellow Commissioner Michael Copps for his suggestion that we engage in consensus building and a productive dialogue with industry by conducting open and transparent workshops to be led by our most able staff. To our Wireline Competition Bureau, I thank you for the tremendous efforts you have already made in this proceeding. I know you have made many personal sacrifices to help us achieve a very thorough Nprm. The time you have spent to review our record, listen to the numerous interested parties in this proceeding, in addition to your crafting the notice, is very much appreciated. In many ways, as my fellow commissioner pointed out, your work is only beginning. I have instructed my staff to work diligently on these matters with you and the other 8th floor advisors so that we can advance our goals as quickly as possible. If there is one refrain I have heard repeatedly in my meetings with industry, it is to please provide the certainty they need to continue to invest in the networks and services they offer. it is my desire, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, and others, that we do just that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Baker.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. It is far from newsworthy that our universal service and intercarrier compensation regimes are unstable as currently structured and long overdue for significant overhaul. The Commission has struggled for the past decade with how to reform these regimes and to shift their focus to tomorrow's networks and challenges. It is also self-evident how critical these regimes have been for carriers, small, mid-sized, and large, to deliver telephone service nationwide, as well as deploy much of today's broadband infrastructure. I support the notice's comprehensive approach to reform universal service and intercarrier compensation. In this proceeding, we must resolve the intractable issues that have frustrated prior Commission reform efforts and put these programs on a path to long-term sustainability with a clear focus on a new national challenge, universal broadband availability. Newly configured and purpose-built programs will be necessary so that Americans, particularly those in rural America, have a clear path to a bright broadband future. Many providers are justifiably concerned about how reform could affect their network investments, service to customers, and even their financial viability. We need to move quickly to provide clarity to all providers as to the future shape of these regimes and to take full advantage of this limited window of opportunity for real reform. We have to be appreciative that the uncertainty surrounding the future of existing revenue streams has consequences on consumers today, inhibiting the ability of providers to justify network investment, slowing broadband deployment. In moving ahead with reform, we must embrace an IP-based infrastructure without depriving providers overnight of existing revenues critical to private investment in our broadband infrastructure. I support the notice's focus on this long-term objective with clear recognition of the need to avoid flash cuts in existing support. I also support the sensible approach in the notice to design new funding mechanisms for broadband. We should resist the urge to simply layer broadband funding on top of today's fractured system, or to simply start off offering duplicative broadband support in addition to existing voice-based support. We need a fresh approach that drives our telecommunications infrastructure from voice to broadband, from circuit switch to IP. It is more fiscally responsible and prudent to craft broadband-specific programs that can better ensure accountability, efficiency, and adequate funding in areas where market forces are not sufficient to drive broadband services to America's consumers. I also appreciate the notice's overall focus on the need for cost containment. The Universal Service Fund has grown from $2.3 billion in 1998 to nearly $9 billion today. The High Cost Fund alone has increased from $1.7 billion in 1998 to $4.4 billion today. Consumers pay for this. The Universal Service Contribution Factor this quarter is at an all-time high of 15.5%. This is real money from real people. It is our obligation to ensure that money is spent wisely to achieve the goals set out by Congress. Taking affirmative steps to stop the runaway growth in all parts of the Universal Service Program is critical, but it is not, standing alone, sufficient reform. Simply shifting the billions spent on voice subsidies to broadband subsidies would forfeit a unique opportunity to ensure that funding is properly targeted and directed at those communities that require ongoing support, and the billions collected from consumers is expended in a fiscally responsible manner. There are significant and difficult decisions ahead, as have been mentioned, and it will be important for all of us to work together to redefine universal service and intercarrier compensation for the broadband age. This notice itself and the proceeding ahead are monumental tasks, and I want to thank Sharon and Ruth, the whole team, and the enormous effort that it's taking to craft such a starting point for an understandable and thorough manner. Well done to you, and I look forward to the coming months as we work together on the details. Thank you.
Well, thank you. The Universal Service Fund is broken. You don't have to take my word for it. You don't have to take our word for it. That was the conclusion in a bipartisan statement of Congressman Lee Terry, the vice chair of the House subcommittee that oversees telecommunications, and Rick Boucher, the former chairman of that same committee. The intercarrier compensation system, intertwined with the USF, is broken too. Neither program is up to the nation's broadband challenge. Both are plagued with waste and inefficiency. So today, I'm happy to join all of my colleagues in putting forward a comprehensive plan with the twin goals of modernizing and streamlining these programs, of getting broadband infrastructure to rural America, promoting investment, promoting this platform for innovation, and cutting costs, promoting efficiency, and constraining the growth of the fund. In doing so, we take a major step forward in implementing the National Broadband Plan. Building on other recommendations of the plan, we've already made important strides to reform important aspects of USF. We've modernized our E-rate program so schools and libraries can get faster internet connections and access to 21st century learning tools. We're updating our rural health care program so patients at rural clinics can benefit from broadband-enabled care like remote consultations with specialists anywhere in the country. These changes are helping deliver on the National Broadband Plan's goal of ultra-high-speed broadband to anchor institutions in every community in the country. We've also proposed a mobility fund to spur the build-out of advanced mobile wireless, an incredible opportunity in areas not served by current generation networks. On Lifeline Link-Up, important programs that help connect low-income Americans, will be proposing reforms next month. Today, we take on the largest part of the USF program, the part focused on supporting service for consumers in rural America, called the High Cost Fund, along with the intertwined Intercarrier compensation system. Universal service, as you've heard, has been at the core of the FCC's mission since the Communications Act of 1934 created the agency. It was reiterated in the 1996 Act. And thank you, Commissioner McDowell, for pointing out that it's a birthday today, an anniversary. Together, USF and ICC helped connect virtually every American to our 20th century communications grid, first bringing basic telephone service to places where there was no economic case for service, and then extending the benefits of mobile phone service to more and more areas of the country. The success of the program in the 20th century was a big deal, promoting commerce, particularly in small towns in rural America, connecting Americans, connecting families. But the communications landscape, as we know, has fundamentally changed since then. First, cord cutting, landline loss. Many of you may have noticed just last week, the current figure for homes relying on wireless service only is 25%. 1/4 of all homes are relying on wireless service only. We have to take that into account as we look at these programs. Second, in looking at changes since the program was adopted, broadband, high-speed internet, now serves the role the telephone service once did. It's the indispensable infrastructure of the 21st century for private investment and innovation. It's become essential to our economic future and our global competitiveness. It's a key building block also for advancing common goals on education, healthcare, energy, and public safety. Multiple studies show, as we've discussed in the past, that the U.S. is lagging on key broadband metrics. Roughly 1/3 of Americans, 33%, aren't online. That figure is 10% in Singapore. And too many parts of our country aren't connected at all. Our data shows that up to 24 million Americans couldn't get broadband today even if they wanted to. The infrastructure simply isn't there. We won't fully realize the promise of broadband and the fundamental promise of American opportunity if large swaths of our country are left out. Americans without broadband know this all too well. Americans like the 17-year-old girl in Alachua County, Florida, who's doing her homework in the parking lot of the local library. So I think this is, we're hearing different people who don't have broadband at their home, who want to get the benefits that their schools are trying to seize for the future. And Commissioner Clyburn told a story about a student who stayed in her library all night. We've seen a letter from a 17-year-old who spent the night in her car in a parking lot of a library. It's obviously unjustifiable. We've heard about firemen in Northern California who missed out on a grant for public safety equipment because their slow dial-up connection that wouldn't meet our standards for broadband kept kicking them off the application website. A couple of months ago, I was in West Virginia with Chairman Rockefeller, who has long been a champion of serving the unserved. During our visit, I spoke with a number of people who can't get broadband access at their homes or their businesses, even though communities right next door are connected. How frustrating is that? This rural digital divide is a problem in virtually every state and territory. Now, at the same time, USF and ICC have become riddled with inefficient, outdated rules and perverse incentives. For example, according to one study, approximately $100 million flow to phone companies each year to serve areas where competing providers, without a dollar of government support, offer voice services to all households. In many places, USF funds 4 or more phone companies to serve the same area. USF leaves hundreds of companies controlling their own funding spigot, guaranteeing double-digit returns. On the ICC side, it can cost 10 times more to call a friend a few towns over than to call someone on the other side of the world. And because of the incentives our rules create, we have traffic pumping, phantom traffic. My colleagues have spoken about those. And carriers are tangled also in costly litigation about the treatment of VoIP traffic for purposes of intercarrier comp, creating real uncertainty with negative effects. Looking at these problems, some say we should eliminate the Universal Service Fund altogether. Government shouldn't be involved. I disagree, and we all disagree. While the world has changed, the importance of universal service has not. We simply shouldn't let millions of Americans be bypassed by the broadband revolution. What we do have to do is streamline and modernize the program. Now, some people say that notwithstanding the kinds of issues we've all spoken about, the Universal Service Fund doesn't need major change, that the status quo is largely fine. I disagree with that, too. The program isn't getting the job done, and it's not on a track to get the job done. Tinkering with it won't be enough. It's leaving millions on the outside looking in, wasting taxpayer dollars every year, and growing in an unconstrained manner. That's unacceptable. Of course, we have to be responsible fiscal stewards to get the most bang for our USF buck. We have to take on this challenge of reform to both tackle the rural-rural divide and put in place programs that deliver on the Communications Act clear objectives of delivering communication services to all of America and tackling the issues that we know exist in the areas of the country that are receiving funding that on which broadband networks are being built. So the reform proposal that we are putting forward today rests on 4 pillars: modernizing USF and intercarrier comp to support broadband networks, ensuring fiscal responsibility by controlling costs and constraining the size of the fund, demanding accountability from both USF recipients and the government and the program itself, and finally enacting market-driven and incentive-based policies to maximize the impact of scarce program resources and the benefits to all consumers. The plan we put forward today also calls for a sensible but certain transition, one that gives participating companies sufficient runway to adapt with no overnight flash cuts, but also with clear milestones and a firm path forward. In the first stage of the transition and what we propose today, we propose cutting waste and inefficiency from the current program and shifting funding as it becomes available to the new broadband-focused Connect America Fund. So we'll fund broadband for unserved areas out of savings from existing programs. Throughout the transition, we'll ensure that all Americans keep robust, reliable voice service and can make calls from their homes. Like any big transition, this one won't be easy, and it will take some time. But we stand ready to work with Congress and all parties on ideas for accelerating the transition so we can provide broadband to more unserved areas faster. I'm very pleased to be joined by all 4 of my colleagues in adopting today's proposals. The Nprm builds on a history of bipartisan commitment to reform on this issue. And when we released the broadband plan last year, we unanimously affirmed the need for Universal Service Fund and intercarrier comp reform. Today we take the next in a series of steps to deliver on that joint commitment with complete agreement on the need to move quickly. Fixing these programs is not a partisan issue. It's simply the right thing to do. So let me turn to what happens next. We plan, as you've heard from all of us, to move expeditiously. As with all our efforts, we'll run a fact-based, data-driven, open, and participatory process in recognition of the important federal-state partnership that undergirds USF and Intercarrier Comp. We're providing a special opportunity for comment from the state members of the Joint Board. And in the coming weeks, there'll be ample opportunity for input from all, including through public workshops on key issues. I call on all stakeholders to engage with us in this process, and I look forward to all input and ideas, particularly on the hard issues, consistent with the pillars for reform I outlined earlier and that we're adopting today as part of the proposal. To those who say that the Connect America Fund should fund the highest speed possibles with all bells and whistles, bring us your specific proposals, but you must show us how much it would cost and who would pay for it, consistent with our commitment to fiscal responsibility and accountability. To providers concerned that the Connect America Fund won't help them build out wired or wireless broadband networks, but will support only their competitors or providers in their area, work with us to maximize the number and types of providers that can compete for support. A technology-neutral approach is key to putting scarce resources to the best possible use. To those who receive Intercarrier Comp, help us develop sensible transition paths that maximize predictability while minimizing disruption and have certainty and firmness to the plan and the path. To those who pay Intercarrier Comp, work with us to ensure that reforms ultimately benefit consumers, which will be the true measure of the success of our efforts. We all understand that change isn't easy, but we all agree that ignoring the problems that we've discussed today is no longer an option. It's not a question of if we should reform the system. It's not even a question of when we should reform the system. It's a question of how we reform it. If we care about the U.S. having a world-class 21st century infrastructure, if we care about U.S. leadership in wired and wireless innovation and our global competitiveness, if we care about fiscal responsibility, if we care about market-based solutions to public policy challenges, we have to move forward on USF and Intercarrier Comp reform along the lines of what we propose today. Let me conclude, as my colleagues have, with a special thank you to the remarkable staff who've worked on this item and have also worked on the other items we've mentioned that we've been adopting over the last few months and that we'll continue to address in the months ahead. Those sitting here at the table, those who've presented and those who haven't, and all of those behind you who've worked so hard on these items. What they say about the post office has been true here at the FCC. This team really did work through snow and rain and sleet and I think some hail, as well as the dark of night, to get this done. It's true of all the people I mentioned. I'm very grateful to my terrific staff in the chairman's office, Zach Katz, who worked so hard on this. This broad team edited and crunched numbers around the clock straight through the holiday weekend. Was it 2 weekends ago? 3 weekends ago, to prepare the item for circulation. They've worked tirelessly in the weeks since to incorporate input from my fellow commissioners, helping refine and improve the notice we are considering today. I'd like to also extend my thanks to the National Broadband Plan team, whose excellent and groundbreaking work laid the foundation for the proposals we're voting on today. Thank you all. Thank you to each of my colleagues for your participation in this effort. Thank you in advance for what it will take to do what we need to do and bring these reforms to conclusion. Thanks to the staffs in each of your offices who also worked very, very hard on these items. I'm proud to cast my vote for this proposal to modernize and streamline Universal Service Fund and Intercarrier Comp to get broadband to all Americans. With that, let us proceed to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. So ordered. The request for editorial privileges is granted. Thank you all very, very much. Much more work to do. Madam Secretary, please announce the next item on our agenda.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, next you will hear update on the Data Innovation Initiative. First, a presentation will be given by Mary Beth Richards, Special Counsel for FCC Reform, and Greg Elin, FCC Chief Data Officer. The presentation will be followed by the final two items on your agenda today to be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau.
So we're going to move directly to a presentation and to items and then to votes on the two items together. And before I turn it over to Mary Beth Richards, I don't want to bury the lead, but I do want to all, as you're listening to Mary Beth's accomplishments over the last year and a half, along with the rest of the team, be aware that Mary Beth will be leaving us at the FCC. I'll have more to say about Mary Beth and her remarkable service and contributions to the agency at the end of the meeting. For now, let me just say that what we'll be hearing about now is just a small portion of the work that you've done at the agency. I thank you for that, and as I said, I'll have more to say. But for now, Mary Beth, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I'm here today to update you on the reform agenda, and in particular, the work we've done around data. But before we turn to data, I wanted to mention progress in a couple of other areas. Last week, the Commission adopted rule changes that will allow us to move forward to expand our electronic comment filing system to include non-docketed proceedings. That will provide for the electronic filing of hundreds of additional actions, such as cable special relief petitions, formal common carrier complaints, and petitions for declaratory ruling, which will save the industry and the Commission staff time and money. We will also now move forward to close those docketed proceedings that are open but dormant. The Consumer Bureau has tentatively identified over 1,000 such proceedings, and under its new delegated authority, once the rules are adopted or go into effect, we'll be issuing a public notice identifying the proceedings prior to closing them out. As part of our ongoing efforts to reduce regulations that are no longer necessary, late last year, December 30th in fact, we issued a public notice seeking comment on those rules that should be repealed or modified because they are no longer necessary in the public interest as a result of competition. Reply comments in our biennial review of telecommunications regulations are due February 22nd, and I encourage parties to participate in that proceeding and recommend rules that can be eliminated or modified. But this morning I wanted to report on the progress we have made in our Data Innovation Initiative, our drive toward modernizing and streamlining how we collect, use, and disseminate data with the goal of improving the agency's fact-based, data-driven decision-making, which is part of our overall plan toward becoming a model of excellence in government. Concurrent with the launch of the initiative, we sought public comment on the review of the data collections practices in the wireline, wireless, and media bureaus. Through that review, we are applying certain principles. If we don't use it, we don't want to collect it. If we no longer need it, we want to stop collecting it. And if we do need to collect it, how can we do it in a way that is electronic, streamlined, sensitive to the burdens it imposes on the filers? For example, should we scale for the size of the respondent? And how do we do it in a way that achieves our goals without imposing unnecessary burdens? As an expert agency, it is important that we have the information necessary to carry out our statutory mission, a mission that is extremely important to our nation, which is why I'm particularly pleased with the progress that we've made. Today, the agency's first Chief Data Officer, Greg Ellen, will give you a status report on the Data Innovation Initiative. Greg.
Thank you, Mary Beth. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Situational awareness, having the right data in the right form at the right time, drives innovation in markets and in government. The overall focus of the Data Innovation Initiative is lowering barriers to filing necessary data and reducing burden. This means getting information in modern, efficient ways, and where applicable, reducing what we collect. This presentation highlights the concrete progress we are making on all 6 major recommendations of data reform, which themselves were a product of the Commission's first ever data inventory. Our first innovation was creating chief data officers in each bureau and office to ensure the better use of data. We've also added the agency's first geographic information officer to ensure we include place, where things are, as a core aspect of how we use and understand data. We are also becoming more efficient internally with how we handle data. We are reducing costs associated with data management through a centralized data set inventory everyone in the agency can see, and this will help us standardize and reduce data elements and thereby synchronize different filings. This new piece of infrastructure also allows us to track confidential data down to the level of individual fields so that we can be transparent while we better protect what is private. We are moving information to the cloud. For example, our 2011 Customer Proprietary Network Information Certification filing is now electronic, streamlined, and stores public documents in a cloud-based service that reduces development costs and provides a better user experience. We are sharing data in 21st century ways. All new web applications are being built on top of publicly available RESTful APIs, which are web services that enable real-time computer-to-computer electronic information sharing. Citizens are participating. Our broadband mobile test app had more than 1 million broadband tests in the last year alone. In 2011, we will be adding APIs, machine-to-machine communication, for accepting data too, a type of functionality long requested by industry. We are already testing internally an API for filing comments into the electronic comment filing system. Modernizing our data infrastructure gives us alternative ways to collect the information the Commission needs for improved data-driven decision-making, while simultaneously reducing burdens that came with filing 20th century forms. The more we modernize, the more we simplify. We are also innovating time-saving data tools, like IssueMap.org, which the FCC officially launches today. IssueMap allows anyone to create a shareable map in 30 seconds from a spreadsheet. As Mary Beth pointed out, reviewing our data collections is a core piece of the Data Innovation Initiative. We started the process of reviewing all agency data collections with the wireline, wireless, media bureaus, and a public notice for comments. Actual processes for reviewing for elimination and their time frame varies because the FCC collects data for various reasons. Sometimes because of a statute or rule, sometimes for purposes of something transactional, like registering for an auction, and sometimes we require data that's provided directly to the public. Identifying the collections that we believe are outdated in their entirety is our first step. We are going to look at all collections. Using appropriate processes, our goal is to stop collecting what we don't need or don't use, whether it is the whole filing, such as Form 1210, associated with legacy rate rules for regulated cable operators, or even if it's just a section of a filing that is not used. Based on the comments from the public notice and internal analysis, we've established a tier framework for examining data further as we move forward. The initial 20 target collections are either completely outdated or appear to have benefits that fall short of their current burdens. Throughout 2011, we will continue to modernize our data infrastructure and to continue to review our collections that can be discontinued. From these initial 20 targets, we will identify and streamline the mechanisms for retiring unnecessary collections. We will also be expanding our zero-based review to include collections in the other bureaus this year. To conclude, the Data Innovation Initiative is driving both new improvements and making data collections less burdensome. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Mary Beth. And do we move directly to the items before we take comments? I think we do. Sharon Gillette.
Yes,
up again. It's a doubleheader.
No rest for the weary. Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the Wireline Competition Bureau has two items for your consideration that are a direct outgrowth of the Data Innovation Initiative that Greg and Mary Beth just described. With me at the table are Steve Rosenberg, the Bureau's Chief Data Officer, Roger Woke, Chief of our Industry Analysis and Technology Division, and Greg Kwan, an attorney in our Competition Policy Division. Steve and Greg will introduce and present the items. Steve?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I'm pleased to be part of the team that will present two notices of proposed rulemaking to modernize and streamline the way the Wireline Competition Bureau collects data. The first item would seek comment on whether and how to reform the Form 477 data program, one of the Commission's primary data collection tools. The second item would seek comment on whether the Commission should eliminate the comparably efficient interconnection and open network architecture reporting requirements, commonly known as the CEI O&A collections, that currently apply to the Bell operating companies. As Greg provides an overview of these items, you'll hear now familiar themes: an effort to ensure the Commission has the data it needs to inform policy, and a parallel effort to minimize the burdens of our data collection and management activities. Developing these NPRMs involved a multidisciplinary team of engineers, economists, and attorneys in our Bureau, whose names shortly, I hope, will appear on the screen. I'd like to thank all of them, including those who participated in this effort, but have since retired.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, the first NPRM seeks comment on reforming the Commission's Form 477 data program to improve the Commission's ability to fulfill its statutory obligations, while streamlining and minimizing the overall cost of the program, including burdens imposed on service providers. Originally established in the year 2000, Form 477 is the Commission's primary tool for collecting data about broadband and local telephone networks and services, and collects data that are a critical precursor to the Commission's ability to fulfill its statutory duties. But after more than a decade of rapid innovation in the market for broadband and telephone services, and consistent with the Government Accountability Office's recent finding that the Commission's broadband data collection generally needs improvement, the item seeks comment on whether it is time to modify the Form 477 to better serve the needs of the Commission, Congress, service providers, and consumers. The item seeks comment on how the Commission can make its data collection as efficient as possible in order to fulfill a number of statutory obligations. These statutory obligations include identifying areas that are truly unserved by broadband and should receive USF support, evaluating the state of competition in a given region to determine when the Commission should forbear from regulation, fulfilling Congress's mandate that the Commission report annually on wireless competition and broadband deployment and availability, and ensuring that network coverage and capacity across the country are robust enough to enable consumers to reach first responders in emergency situations. To that end, the item seeks comment on the collection of data regarding telephone and broadband services that may be important to the Commission's fulfillment of these statutory obligations, including data on subscriptions, deployment of communications networks, prices, service quality and customer satisfaction, and ownership and contact information. For each of the type of data discussed, the item seeks comment on the burdens and benefits of any proposed changes. Finally, the item's stated goal is to ensure that the Commission has the data it needs while minimizing the overall burdens of the data collection. The second NPRM before you seeks comment on removal of the narrowband CEI and O&A reporting requirements that currently apply to the Bell operating companies due to a lack of continuing relevance and utility. These requirements were adopted over 20 years ago, and the reports filed pursuant to them appear to be no longer of use to the Commission, consumers, or industry. This NPRM is part of the process of identifying data collections that could be eliminated without reducing the effectiveness of the Commission's decision-making process. In conclusion, the Wireline Competition Bureau recommends that the Commission adopt these items and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you all. Excellent. Commissioner Copps.
Thank you. Very interesting. Gathering good data, an issue near and dear to this commissioner's heart, as I know it is to the chairman's and my colleagues, is critical to the FCC's ability to do its job. For far too many years, we moved away from this responsibility, relying less and less on our own analysis and substituting limited commercial data, sometimes skewed, for our own. Certainly we should be smart, sparing, and efficient about the information we collect to avoid imposing undue burdens. But the public interest must always be our lodestar in these considerations. Consumers are certainly my first and foremost concern, but markets too rely on credible and reliable government data. How can a country dig its way out of a recession without solid economic indicators like unemployment numbers and GDP? As I've said before, if federal and state governments decided tomorrow to stop gathering data and regulating how it is reported, the U.S. economy would come to a screeching halt. If we want the Internet economy to continue to drive growth and opportunity in this country, we must have regular, systematic reporting of high-quality broadband data. How will we know where to invest scarce public resources if we don't know with any meaningful specificity where broadband is deployed? How can innovators and investors make informed decisions with regard to new technologies and applications if we don't know the broadband speed that American consumers are actually getting? Without understanding the value proposition that broadband offers, that is the price per bit, how can we promote its adoption and ensure that no American is on the wrong side of the digital divide? These are not new questions before the Commission. We have asked many of them twice before. In 2008, I concurred with the Commission's further notice on many of these questions because I believed it was time then for a final order detailing the kinds and amounts of data the Commission needs to protect American consumers. While I am more optimistic now that we will get action soon, consistency leaves me no choice but to concur this time, too, on this first notice, the Form 477 NPRM. I look forward to the third time being the charm, with a final order in the very near term. I vote to approve the second notice, an NPRM proposing the elimination of legacy reporting obligations stemming from the computer inquiries. The Commission has already relieved carriers of the underlying obligations, partly, however, through a controversial and altogether messy deemed-granted forbearance process. The original idea there had been acquiring data to maintain competition, and the forbearance process under two previous commissions was tragically aimed at getting rid of both the data and the competition. The history behind this item, though, begs another question, not whether we are collecting data irrelevant to the Commission, but whether we have all the new data the Commission needs to understand what is going on in the world of business, technology, and consumer information. I freely admit that the particular information here was a vestige of a bygone era, but I only want to emphasize that ridding ourselves of unneeded data requirements is actually less important than guaranteeing we have the data we need. So I welcome the work that Greg and his team is doing. It's the right thing to do. I just want to urge real caution when we do this. I remember very vividly, not so long after I got here, the Commission had eliminated some accounting data from the companies that some of the state members of the Separations Board really wanted and thought they really needed. But once it's gone, it's awfully difficult to get back, and we were not successful in getting it back. So I just urge caution there, but it's a good and wonderful initiative, and I said totally in consonance with the chairman's strong emphasis on knowing where we are before we act, and I appreciate the work that all of you have done on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Copps. Commissioner McDowell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And many thanks, Mary Beth and Greg and your whole team for your great presentation. I really do appreciate it. I do want to see that list of names at some point. Hopefully that'll come up on the PowerPoint or on the screen so we can thank all of them as well. But all of your dedicated work in conducting a comprehensive review of the Commission's data collection obligations is really greatly appreciated. Of course, I wholeheartedly support reducing the Commission's regulatory burdens whenever possible, including eliminating certain reporting requirements that have become outdated. I'm encouraged to hear that your team has already targeted, well, by my last count, it was 20 collections to discontinue soon, but I think I heard a higher number than that earlier. In that spirit, I support the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, which proposes to eliminate the Commission's remaining Computer 3 requirements in that regard. Due to various reforms over the years, collection of this information may no longer be necessary, and it does not appear that the Commission relies on this data in its decision-making process. In short, collection of this data is likely antiquated and burdensome. I commend the Chairman for taking this step to clear unnecessary regulatory underbrush. In addition, I support the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, which seeks to modernize the FCC Form 477 data program. Given that Form 477, and I'm not getting all choked up over it, I have a cold, I apologize. This is very emotional for me, but yeah. But given that the Form 477 process has not been reformed in more than 10 years, initiating this proceeding will hopefully result in a more efficient and effective program. It is important for the FCC to obtain appropriate and relevant data to help us make informed decisions, and this rulemaking will open the dialogue on this topic. However, we must ensure that we have adequate legal authority to require the collection of the information discussed in this notice. As such, I was encouraged that the Chairman agreed to ask about our legal authority throughout this rulemaking, so thank you. I'm hesitant, however, about the section of the notice which discusses whether the FCC should collect broadband pricing information. Although such efforts may have the best of intentions, I'm concerned that if the FCC ultimately decides that it should collect broadband pricing information, the process could lay the foundation for the FCC to engage in rate regulation of broadband internet services in the future. I hope that doesn't happen. I'll be interested to learn more about others' perspectives on this particular issue during the comment cycle. But in sum, I do support our effort to modernize this process, but we must be wary that we aren't taking one step forward and then two steps back by reducing data collection requirements in some areas, but then imposing new and unnecessary burdens in other areas. So in short, I thank all of you for your long hours on these two notices, and I look forward to reviewing the record and working with my colleagues and stakeholders on these proceedings. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner McDowell. Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one moment, if I could revisit the last item, not to scare you. I thanked one bureau and did not adequately thank another, so allow me to thank the Wireless Bureau. I think Ruth might have left, but in her absence, thank you and all of the other persons that were reflected in that in this slide. I want to still get along with everybody, so no, I sincerely want to thank all of those involved in that item. Good policy must be informed by complete, accurate, and relevant information. We should be mindful, however, that the collection of data for accurate analysis occupies the resources of both industry and the Commission, and that ultimately, consumers and taxpayers are the ones who pay. Accordingly, it is appropriate for the FCC to periodically review the need for the information it requests. Where currently collected data is no longer relevant for the benefit of Congress, the Commission, or consumers, we should begin proceedings to explore the elimination of that information as we do today with respect to CEI and ONA data. Of course, to the extent that the data from industry is required so that we may fulfill our statutory obligations, then it is important that we ensure that the information we obtain is sufficient for us to do so. As such, it is important for us to periodically assess whether the data we are collecting relays the information we need to make good policy choices and to issue reports required by statute. With respect to the information we collect on Form 477, which we use as our primary tool for analyzing the status of local telephone and broadband network services networks and services, I support the notice's consideration of modifications to the types of data reported on the form. As the notice describes, our various duties to promote policies that ensure universal service, public safety, and competitive communications marketplace, and the reasonable and timely deployment of broadband networks require that we have the data necessary to make informed decisions and issue knowledgeable reports, just as Congress intended. I believe it is appropriate for us to revisit the type of data we seek on Form 477, given that both the GAO report and the National Broadband Plan found that the data was insufficient and limits our ability to fulfill certain of our policy-making and reporting duties. Certainly, we must balance the need for information with the burden that data collection may have on the industry. The notice recognizes this careful balance by seeking guidance on the possible use and limitations of publicly available or third-party commercial data to avoid such burdens on industries, including small businesses. I am pleased that we are exploring the use of additional broadband data, such as pricing information, so that we can better assess affordable and comparable prices. As we consider explicitly supporting broadband networks and service in our USF-ICC reform Nprm adopted today, it is important that we have the information necessary to determine whether rates in rural areas are comparable to rates in urban areas, so that we can assess whether we have met the goals of Section 254 for ensuring universal service. Furthermore, the Broadband Data Improvement Act requires that we compare pricing for broadband service with other countries. Thus, a collection of pricing information may be necessary to fulfill that obligation. Finally, I am pleased that we are undertaking a significant effort to allow the public to access the data we collect, as well as our analysis of that information through our website. It is important that as we are informed, we use every tool at our disposal to inform the public. Many thanks are due to Mary Beth, who we'll miss, Greg, and other data experts for your work on our data innovation initiative, as well as to the Wireline Competition Bureau for your work on Form 477 and CEI O&A notices. Thank you.
Mr. Clyburn, thank you. Commissioner Baker.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Great job, which is no surprise when you look at who's leading this effort. Really way to go, Mary Beth. We are absolutely going to miss you. I support the process to right-size our data collections and appreciate the comprehensive approach that we are taking. I also support the specific decision to review the narrow-band Computer 3 CEI and O&A requirements. This is an overdue and welcome step forward. I hope that we can use the same standard whether the Commission relies on a submission in the course of its normal decision-making, namely to make more proposals to eliminate or scale back other outdated data submissions. And again, a very sincere thank you to Mary Beth, the team, and Greg. The Commission also proposes to potentially expand its data requirements associated with our broadband deployment reporting. I welcome all efforts to ensure that we have reliable and accurate data to inform our decision making. In a number of places, the notice proposes increases, potentially significant ones, in the type and scope of data gathering required. In the spirit of the broader data initiative, I believe the Commission should act judiciously and answer a few threshold questions before expanding any of our data collection obligations, such as what is the nexus between the data to be requested and our statutory responsibilities? Is this new data integral to fulfilling a statutory responsibility? And is the data gathering the best and least burdensome means to acquire the data? I appreciate that many of these questions are explicitly raised in the notice and welcome the Chairman's recognition of the heavy burden that well-intentioned data requests may have on the industry. I will be watching this proceeding closely with particular attention on proposals surrounding broadband pricing and consumer satisfaction metrics. But again, I really thank you for your efforts.
Thank you, Commissioner Baker. Commission policymaking is only as good as the facts and data on which our decisions are based. That's why data reform has been an important priority for me since I arrived here as chairman. It's why it's vital that the Commission collect the data it needs to do its job and serve the public. It's why the Commission shouldn't waste resources collecting data it doesn't need, and why, wherever possible, we should use modern technology to increase the benefits of data collection and reduce the burdens. It was with these principles in mind that I appointed Mary Beth Richards, a special counsel for FCC reform, as one of my first actions at the FCC, and charged Mary Beth with, among other things, conducting an agency-wide data review. Mary Beth assembled a team that included Austin Schlick, who's here, and Paul Dessau, who runs our strategic planning office, and Steve Van Rokel, our managing director, to think about a process for doing a data review. One of the earliest recommendations of that team has led to Greg Ellen sitting here, and it was the recognition that the Commission had no organizational structure and accountability around data, a big gap between what was so important to the Commission and how we were organized. And the first recommendation of Mary Beth and the team was to appoint a chief data officer, which we've done, and we've been very lucky to have Greg Ellen fill the role. Part of the recommendation was also to increase accountability and a proper focus on data by ensuring that there was a chief data officer at each of our bureaus. Steve Rosenberg sits here, and I believe each of our bureaus now has a chief data officer up and running. If they don't, they will, because without this kind of structure and accountability, we can't make sure we have the data we need, and we can't get rid of data collections that we don't need anymore. I'm very pleased that in addition to, at the very early stages, helping us improve our structure and accountability, the data review team is now showing concretely the benefits of its work, identifying 20 discrete data collections to target for elimination, collections that once made sense but don't anymore, 2 of which we act on today. We're formally proposing to eliminate today, and I've instructed our FCC reform team and our data team to move forward on the other 18 while continuing their agency-wide data review. I'm also pleased today that the Wireline Bureau will announce the elimination of a separate outdated reporting requirement imposed on a carrier more than 20 years ago, also no longer necessary. And of course, I'm also very pleased with the steps that Greg, that you and Mary Beth identified to improve our efforts to handle the data that we do have. I'll come back to those. We approach the review that we launched today of one of the FCC's most important data gathering tools, Form 477, in the same spirit of efficient and effective government that Mary Beth and Greg have been leading as part of the data reform initiative. Since 2000, the FCC has relied on data gathered through Form 477 to inform its policies relating to voice and broadband services. It's one of the most important data collection tools that we have at the FCC. It hasn't undergone a substantial review in quite some time. In 2004 and 2008, the Commission made modifications to parts of the form in order to collect more information that, on a bipartisan basis, the Commission believed was relevant. Now, in view of ongoing changes in technology and the marketplace and questions raised about the benefits and burdens of the existing form, we're launching this review and asking all stakeholders to help us take a comprehensive look at Form 77, update its design to answer today's questions, not yesterday's. This review, another recommendation of the National Broadband Plan, will help us fulfill important statutory obligations, including promoting broadband in unserved areas, promoting competition, and ensuring public safety. It'll also ensure that we don't collect voice and broadband data that we no longer need. Now, these data reform efforts are part of the FCC reform team's larger initiative to remove regulatory barriers to a thriving broadband economy. In the last year, the Commission has taken a number of actions to deliver on this goal, including expediting licensing of spectrum that can be used for broadband services, lifting restrictions on some mobile satellite spectrum that can be used for broadband, setting limits on how long localities can take to approve or deny tower siting requests, significantly streamlining the E-rate program's application forms, making it easier for radio stations to certify compliance with our rules. A few weeks ago, as part of this overall reform effort, we launched our biennial review of the FCC's telecommunications regulations to determine which of our regulations are no longer necessary due to competition. Tomorrow, we'll be hosting a conference with leaders from across the broadband economy to identify further opportunities to remove regulatory barriers to broadband build-out. And there's more to come, particularly when it comes to using technology to promote FCC reform and improved interaction with the public, ensuring that public data is machine readable and searchable, continuing to make progress on some of the sharing of APIs that Greg mentioned, an opportunity to empower the public and third parties to take public data and maximize its benefit to the public. All these efforts are in line with the President's recent executive order to ensure that our regulatory systems use the best, most innovative, and least burdensome tools for achieving regulatory ends in order to promote economic growth, innovation, competitiveness, and job creation. As I informed senior staff last week, I expect the FCC to perform its responsibilities consistent with the principles in the executive order. In the months ahead, we'll continue to look for opportunities to use modern technology and common sense to help make the FCC a model of excellence in government. So thank you, Mary Beth, thank you, Greg Ellen, and all the members of this team for your work as part of the data reform effort and as part of the specific proposals that we'll be voting on in a moment. It's very important work, and you have our gratitude. So with that, I think what we'll do is vote on each NPRM separately. So first, let's take a vote on the NPRM regarding modernizing Form 477 data program and form. All those in favor of the NPRM say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, so ordered. And now we'll take a vote on the second item regarding elimination of the comparably efficient interconnection and open network architecture reporting obligations. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, so ordered. The requests for editorial privileges are granted. So team, thank you very much. Now before we adjourn, let me come back and address this topic that I've been trying very hard to avoid, as Mary Beth knows, which is the alleged departure. My strategy has been to hope that if I refuse to acknowledge it or talk about it, it wouldn't happen. But it appears to be happening, so let me say a few words about Mary Beth. Mary Beth, of course, is so well known to all of us here who are members of the Commission, all of the senior staff, and virtually all of the staff at the FCC. It's a difficult goodbye for many, many reasons. Mary Beth has been a friend and a mentor to so many of the FCC family, me included. It's no secret that one of the first things I did when I became chairman was appoint Mary Beth as special counsel for FCC reform. What's less well known is that one of the first calls I made when I was nominated, I think I may have made this call before I was nominated, was to Mary Beth, and I think my question was, what do I do now? And Mary Beth had many answers, a great deal of advice that I took to heart. I worked with Mary Beth, as so many of us have, but I worked with Mary Beth 15 years ago when I was a staffer at the FCC. And the truth is, mostly I watched Mary Beth just do so many amazing things on behalf of then Chairman Hunt and Chairman Kennard, but mostly on behalf of the public that the FCC serves. Mary Beth has just magical skills for problem solving, a real mastery of the FCC, as well as all of our processes and all of the institutional history that's so important. There was really no one better who could have possibly led the effort that we've run over the last year and a half on FCC reform. One of the first things that I wanted to do as chairman was put the agency on a path to be a model for excellence in government. To the extent that we've made progress on that, and I think we have, we owe so much of that to Mary Beth Richards, and I think one of the best ways that we can continue to honor the role that you've played for so many years at the FCC is to make sure that going forward we continue making progress. I think the fact that we have Greg Ellen, Chief Data Officers, the fact that we have an FCC reform team ensures that there'll be continuity. But there's so much that you do that there really is a lot that we're going to have to do to make sure that we can continue to see the success that we've had thanks to all of your work. Mary Beth, I'm really not sure what we'll do without you. We know at the FCC, of course, your phone number, where to find you. We can connect with you through multiple means, wired and wireless, and you can be sure that we'll all do so. For now, let me just tell you personally how much I've enjoyed working with you, how lucky the FCC has had to have you for the last year and a half, but also for the many years that it's had you before. We wish you well, we wish you good luck, and we know you'll continue to be part of the FCC family. Let me stop there and ask if any of my colleagues would like to.
Well, I would like to add a word. One of the very best and happiest things that happened to me when I became acting chairman of the commission in 2001 was having Mary Beth come back to the FCC, and I can't tell you how confidence building it was for me to see her usually smiling face in my office every morning at 9 o'clock and or before, and I always had a little stack, sometimes not so little stack, of items that were particularly sensitive and difficult to handle that I knew she would proceed to take care of, and that invariably happened. She's a real professional. Talk about being data-driven and fact-driven, but also with a practical sense of how government works, and also an appreciation of how government should work, and applying both of those perspectives to the problems at hand. So I too join the chairman in saying we hate to see you leave. I do understand you may be staying in public service. That's wonderful news for all of us and for the country. And it's been a delight working with you, and I look forward to continued contact and friendship as the years unroll.
Thank you. Good. Commissioner Joe?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mary Beth, I incorporate by reference the eloquent remarks of the chairman and Commissioner Copps. You are really a consummate public servant. You really are a model for all public servants, all those who wish to serve the public. And it's been terrific working with you. I look forward to continuing to work with you. I imagine Chairman Janikowski might have a few words to say to the head of that other agency that's stealing you away. But in any case, it is certainly their gain and our loss. And you've been wonderful to work with. So thank you so much for your service here at the FCC.
Thank you.
Mary Beth, hopefully you won't get upset at me saying this, but you remind me of that certain teacher back home that you never tell how much she meant to you until you get to this point in time. I want to thank you for being so patient and encouraging and just downright honest. You could tell me something, and it may or may not be true, but I believe it anyway. Because you just have that demeanor and that that presence and just that spirit in which we would all benefit from emulating. So while we again are all saddened that you will leave, the immediate family, on a day-to-day basis, you have really left an impression on this commissioner and as a model, as the type of public servant and person that we all should strive to be. So thank you very much for letting us get to know you, and I wish you the best.
Thank you.
I share in all the eloquent remarks of my fellow commissioners and chairman. Mary Beth, you're wonderful. You are a model public servant. You are a great friend, and you make everything work. So thank you for all your efforts here, and we hope to stay in touch and wish you the best in the future.
Thank you. Do any of my colleagues have any other personnel announcements? No, yes, please.
I do. Well, another sort of farewell, unfortunately. So wanted to express my deep appreciation for Antonia McGowan, also known as Tony McGowan, who hopefully you're up there watching, Tony. I thought you were going to come down for this. Oh, you're there. Raise your hand. Stand up for everyone to see you. All right. We want to thank you. We can applaud. That's fine. Let's all applaud. She so ably substituted as my confidential assistant during Bridget Calamus's maternity leave, and originally to entice her to come, we told Tony that filling in for Bridget would be easy, that the pace of late 2010 and early 2011 would be simply just sleepy. And other than net neutrality, the Comcast and BCU merger, universal service intercarrier compensation, several trips, and several other things, it's been just dead quiet in our office. But in all seriousness, Tony has given us her all during some intense times, and we greatly appreciate her willingness to step into the breach. We were lucky to entice her back upstairs because she already knew that the confidential assistant position is not for wimps at all. Tony began her career here at the FCC nearly 14 years ago when she followed Michael Powell to the commission to serve as his confidential assistant, first during his time as a busy commissioner and then during his tenure as even a busier chairman. And it must have been her ability to survive a long stint in a chairman's office that convinced Tony to take on temporary chores in just a regular commissioner's office, while also juggling the responsibilities of her real job as a management analyst in the commission's office of the managing director. So she's been working two jobs here for the past several months. But in that role, she has won kudos for her work in helping the FCC's IT operations communicate effectively with the many, many people who rely on the agency's information systems. We've benefited from the same cheerful, calm, and efficient can-do attitude that Tony has brought to her other FCC posts. In addition, she's wonderfully knowledgeable about the internal administrative workings of the agency, which sometimes can be as much of a mystery to the people inside the building as it is to people outside the building, hopefully less so now. But of course, now that we know what a treasure Tony is, you should not expect our requests for help to completely stop once Bridget comes back. So thank you very, very much again, Tony, and you've been a terrific asset.
Thank you. Do you have any announcements? Any announcements? Well, with that, thank you very much, Tony, on behalf of all of us. Thank you. And Madam Secretary, please announce the date of the next FCC meeting.
The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission will be Thursday, March 3rd, 2011 at 10 a.m.
Thank you. We're adjourned.
Everybody's going to have one question, and to streamline this, I think we'll start from your right and go left. So we'll start here.
Hi, Katie Bachman at Adweek. I was just hoping you could give me a big ballpark number that would sort of quantify or estimate how much you think has been wasted in these two funds. I know you gave some kind of examples of, $20,000 to support one household, but I'm hoping you can give me a big boxcar number.
Well, I think that's part of what we'll get in the course of the proceeding and the record that we'll develop. I think you'll see in the notice we're issuing today, in my remarks and others, identifying specific areas of policies that are very hard to justify and a commitment to reforming those policies. If we can quantify it into a single big number, we'll do it for you. But some of it will follow from debate about which policies should change, and in those policies, where the lines are.
Hi, David Chafee with fibertoday.com. I wanted to talk a little bit about the collaboration between the FCC and the Broadband Stimulus Program and USF. And I was wondering, there's going to be considerable dark fiber excess capacity as the result of the Broadband Stimulus Program, and I was wondering if that could play into your proposed USF competitive auction alluded to in the USF NPRM.
Well, without commenting on how much dark fiber there will be at the end of this, I think part of what we'll certainly look at in reforming USF and intercarrier comp is the full landscape and the full marketplace, and taking into account of what will become available as a result of those programs is obviously something that we'll look at, and hopefully will make the job of reforming USF and rolling out broadband to unserved America easier to do. Please.
Alex Howard, O'Reilly Media. Giving citizens better tools to visualize data through sites like issuemap.org is helpful. I've gone and plugged in a spreadsheet this morning and seen what would work there. But in terms of looking at how various rules and data are going online, there's some concern in the technical community out in the Valley that there is a window in which rules were not posted ahead of the time they were voted upon. And there's an analogy to Congress here in terms of posting data. There are discussions of putting legislation online 72 hours before voting. What is the expectation that FCC rules and accompanying data could be posted online 72 hours before votes in 2011?
Well, the practice here, consistent with the Administrative Procedures Act, is to put proposals online well before they're voted on. And so in the proceeding that you're referring to, that was conducted in a way consistent with all the best practices under the Administrative Procedures Act. A notice was issued with proposed rules much earlier. There were workshops, hearings, extensive public input and discussion, public notices seeking additional comment on specific items. So it's a process that, as I said, is consistent with the best practices under the Administrative Procedures Act.
Hi, Eliza Krigman, Politico. How do you respond to criticism from Free Press that you're moving forward with universal service reform without accurate broadband data, and that the questions that were laid out in the data collection item today have already been asked and answered?
I'm not sure I understood the last part, but I think, look, the consensus, as you heard today, that we need to move forward on universal service fund reform and intercarrier comp reform is really broad. And in order to improve those programs, get broadband to unserved America, control costs, we need to act, and we need to act as soon as possible. As you saw in the other item we adopted today, we need to constantly make sure that we're collecting the data that we need, that we're not collecting the data that we don't need. So I'm not sure I understand the point, but we're proceeding on both.
Their point is that the questions laid out in the data collection item have already been asked and answered, and that the Commission isn't making progress. It should be already changing its
Jonathan Charnitsky, Broadband Breakfast. There have been some concerns from rural states, especially South Dakota and Alaska, that as the USF rolls into the Connect America Fund, that as the Connect America Fund progresses efficiently from areas of higher density to lower density, that the areas of lower density still collecting USF funds will be left out in the cold while waiting for the Connect America Fund to get to them. Do you have any comments on that?
The way we're looking at it is right now the programs are contributing to a rural-rural divide. There are parts of the country that in rural areas that are supported by USF where broadband has been rolled out, in some cases faster speeds and higher quality service than people typically get in urban areas. And then there are other parts of rural America that are getting no broadband at all. The direction that we've outlined today is, one, looking at the high cost fund, let's begin to get savings, efficiencies out of that, and as we do, begin funding a Connect America fund that's focused on broadband, and at the beginning will be focused on unserved areas. One of the things this does is create a challenge that I talked about yesterday, I talked about it again today, is how do we accelerate the transition to bring service to unserved America more quickly, and that's an area that we hope to make progress on so that the rollout of broadband support to unserved areas can happen faster than the transition on this side.
Lynn Stanton, TR Daily. There seems to be momentum building for reallocation of the 700 megahertz D block to public safety rather than re-auctioning it. Are you prepared to support reallocation, and if not, why not?
Well, the momentum that I'm most excited about is the momentum to move forward on the primary recommendation in the broadband plan on public safety, which was to finally get a mobile broadband public safety network built in the United States. And the recognition that in order to do that, the private market on its own won't do it, that funding will have to be provided for it. And so when I look at developments, that's the most important part that I see, that we're getting closer to a very important recommendation of the plan, getting a mobile broadband public safety network built and funded. So that's what I'm focused on. That's the most important part of the public safety component of the plan. And any momentum to accomplish that would be welcome, because we need to get there.
So you're indifferent to which path is taken, reallocation or re-auction?
Well, the National Broadband Plan speaks for itself. Congress has made clear that it's going to address the topic. Our job is to be a resource to Congress and to put in place what Congress decides. But I want to distinguish between the highest priority items: getting a mobile broadband public safety network built, which won't happen on its own, and it won't happen just by wanting it. That's the highest priority.
Josh Smith, National Journal. Was there in this USF revision, was there any thought or intent to making this flexible enough that it would, could fund whatever the next big thing as well, or is this, just for broadband as the last one was just for telephone? Well,
I think making sure that the program can accommodate evolving technologies and uses is a very important part of our goal. There is a fundamental shift that needs to occur, and that's the shift from analog to digital in these programs. And so we are, deeply into making that shift as an economy. As your question assumes, we're not as close in making that fundamental shift in our policies. So fundamentally, what we're proposing to do with USF and Intercarrier Comp is to say, hey, listen, finally, let's get these policies to catch up with the analog to digital shift that is obviously occurring very rapidly. It's incredibly important that we do that, because digital IP networks, we know, are our platform for innovation, for private investment, for our global competitiveness. It's true of both wired and wireless digital IP networks. Now, having done that, to a certain extent, moving from analog to digital, we will have moved to a platform that will evolve in a way that analog has essentially stopped evolving. But that's a long answer. The short answer to your question is yes.
Hi, Ted Gotch with Telecommunications Reports. For years, reverse auctions was generally seen as a non-starter by Democratic regulators, yet this is now marks the second USF-related Nprm to support the idea. And I was just wondering, what has changed that makes now reverse auctions a necessity? Is it really the only way to constrain costs so that it can cover, the USF can cover broadband going forward?
I can't speak to the premise of your question because I wasn't around. I was, doing other things, and as you know, I was in the private sector, doing very different things. When I came to this issue and worked with the team, as part of the National Broadband Plan effort, and as part of the effort that led to the notices today, it became clear to me that we needed to have efficient market-based distribution mechanisms for the public funds that are distributed as part of the Universal Service Fund. So I don't see it as a partisan issue, but as working to find the best answers to get broadband to rural America, which is important, and do it in the most efficient, most targeted way that creates the best incentives to reach the most people using the funding most efficiently and effectively.
Hi, Chairman. Paul Barbagallo, BNA. This item does not target contributions. Can you comment at all on the work being done to address those issues? Might we expect an Nprm in the next couple months?
Sure. So a couple of things. One is there are open proceedings and contributions, and so there's a record that's been built. There's been a lot of discussion, and there'll continue to be. The action that we took today reflects the view that the first thing we need to do with Universal Service Fund and Intercarrier Comp is address the way that they are spending money, making sure that we have programs that are efficient, that are targeted, that are modern in the sense that they're supporting broadband, not telephone service. And so what you'll see as part of this proceeding is a real focus on making sure that we have policies that are doing what these programs are supposed to do. Period. As I said, with contributions, there's a record that's been developed, and we'll address that at the appropriate time. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Thanks for staying late. And David Fisk is here. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll now proceed to the staff bureau chief portion of the briefing. So we'll start with the USF items. So Sharon Gillette and her team. Any questions?
This is USF, right?
But USF. Ted, go ahead.
Yes. Hi, Ted Gotch, Telecommunications Reports. I guess to start, can you just explain in regards to the reverse auctions issue? I understand that I guess it's going to be used for the Connect America Fund initially as it gets phased in, targeting those areas without service. Is that correct? And then how will, if you could then maybe a little fully, then how will it expand going forward using, will all of the Connect America Fund be doled out using reverse auctions in the long run? Can you give a little explanation there?
So the notice proposes a two-phase transition. In the first phase, in the intermediate phase, we would use a reverse auction to target broadband to areas that are unserved. The proposal is to use the map that will be coming out next week as the guide for where areas are that are unserved. In the longer term, and that initial phase is a portion of today's high-cost fund. The longer-term proposal is to migrate all the high-cost funding into the Connect America Fund, and the notice seeks comment on several different options for how that fund might be structured. One is that we would conduct an auction, a similar type of reverse auction for the entire country. A second is that we would conduct an auction, but prior to conducting an auction, we would offer incumbent providers who hold the carrier of last resort obligation a right of first refusal to continue serving an area based on an amount to be determined by a cost model. And the third option would be to continue, possibly to do different things in different areas of the country, for example, perhaps based on the types of carriers that serve them.
Okay, Eliza?
Hi. Could you tell me exactly what it proposes with regard to rate of return regulation and whether it's the eventual elimination of that? And I have one other question. Whether it addresses the carrier of last resort provision as well.
Let me take the second question first. Carrier of last resort obligations are a state-level obligation. So we seek comment on how we can work with states to, in that context. Those obligations typically apply only to voice service today. One of the things that the notice seeks comment on is if there is federal funding for broadband, what the obligations should be that go with that. That would be presumably a federal obligation. We also seek comment on whether there should be a state role, for example, in helping to enforce those obligations. Your first question?
On rate of return regulation,
Right.
does it, what does it propose? Does it call for its eventual elimination? You know?
So in the near term, in the first phase of the transition, the proposal is not to change the rate of return, not to undo the rate of return system, rather to curb some of the practices that are enabled by loopholes in our rules today, to close those loopholes, to make some changes so that within the rate of return system, there are about 800 holding companies in that system today, that there would be a more equitable distribution of funds within that system, as well as, for example, developing benchmarks for reasonable expenditures under that system and caps on the amount of support a carrier could receive per line. There's many more proposals in the item. They're quite detailed, and I commend you to the item, but that's the highlight of them. Do you want to hear more?
Well, I just wanted to know, you said that was the first phase. I just want to know if
that's the first phase, yes.
calls
That's the
for
first
ending
phase.
it at some point.
In the first phase, there's a long list of nibs and tucks, things to tighten up the system. In the longer term, we propose to revisit what impact are those changes. We propose to revisit the impact of the intermediate term changes and see where we're at. The item includes proposals to, if we were to shift away from the rate of return system to a more incentive-based framework, how would we do it? There's a concrete proposal for that in the item. It could be used both there's two types of support that rate of return carriers receive. One is access charges, and those under the rate of return system, those are set based on rate of return. What the item proposes is a method that could be used to set those in a predictable way, but not necessarily, would not be consistent with rate of return. Secondly, that same method could be used for ICLS. It's a form of universal service support that rate of return carriers receive. So the short answer to your question, in the long term, yes, we see comment on a method for moving rate of return carriers to a more incentive-based system.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay. Katie?
Opening comments 45 days after Federal Register publication. The state members of the Joint Board have an opportunity to file comments 14 days after that. And the remaining, the reply round would then be 21 days after that. 21? And there's also on the ICC arbitrage and phantom traffic issues, that is an accelerated comment cycle with opening comments after 30 days and reply comments on those issues only 15 days after the opening comments.
Paul?
Hi, Paul Barbagallo with BNA. I'm curious as to whether the item cites to the National Broadband Plan definition of broadband and whether under the new subsidy system, whether that definition will change over time as the FCC takes a look at what broadband is. Anybody?
The Nprm notes that the National Broadband Plan recommended that broadband be defined by a number of attributes, including speed of 4 down, 1 up, and the item seeks comment on that. It also notes that some have suggested that the speed threshold should be higher, and others have suggested that the speed threshold be lower, and it seeks comment on those alternative suggestions as well.
And does the item explicitly recommend any particular path going forward to reviewing the definition of broadband with respect to subsidies?
In general, it acknowledges that the definition will change over time and seeks comment on the process by which we would re-examine it periodically through various means.
Thank you.
Lynn?
My memory might just be really bad here. I thought back when the National Broadband Plan came out, there was some indication that the support was to be one time only, or was that just for wireless to build out broadband?
The National Broadband Plan recommended that the Commission consider a, quote, fast track to provide one-time support. And then it acknowledged that over the longer term, the Connect America Fund would provide ongoing support. And so one way to think about it is the reverse auction that has been described that would be done initially would be equivalent to that fast track. That would be the one-time support to get an infusion of capital to address unserved areas, and then the longer-term Connect America Fund would be providing the ongoing support for those areas of the country where you need ongoing support because it's not economically viable to serve the consumers.
Okay, any last question? Ted, take the last one.
Hi. There was a mention that there was going to be a limit placed on the per line subsidy, and it didn't really mention, is there a number that you guys are capping it at, and can you fill us in on that?
The item proposes to cap the amount of support per line at $3,000 per year. And that would be the total, all programs, all high-cost programs.
Okay, thank you very much. That does for the USF. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
I forgot to mention one thing. That would apply in the continental U.S. So, well,
not Sandwich Islands, Hawaii.
Well, there are different circumstances in places like Alaska. So.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions on any of the data items, either the presentation? All right, Lynn does. So if the data team would come forward.
Lynn Stanton, Telecommunications Reports.
Go ahead, Lynn, with your question.
Can you provide any details on what the new pieces of information that are being proposed for the Form 477? I got the impression that price was one of them, but are there any others that are being proposed?
So the item discusses The item discusses 5 categories of data. There's deployment, price, service quality and customer satisfaction, ownership and contact information, and I just skipped one. Subscription, thank you, which we already collect.
So you don't already collect deployment at this point?
No, the 477 only collects subscription data.
And one other question. Can we expect the actual text of the item anytime soon? And if not, do you know what the comment deadlines will be?
The comment cycle is 30 days after publication in the Federal Register, and then reply comments 15 days after that. And we'll try and release it as quickly as we can.
Anything else?
Go ahead. Mine.
I'm good. Oh, okay. Ted?
Hi. I'm actually sneaking in a not very substantive question from the last one. Just to ask, was there a ballpark, same question about when that it might be released, the rulemaking, the previous one? Is it a today thing, or I'm talking about on the USF one? I'm sorry, I'm not being clear. Yes, sorry, I forgot. I just figured it wasn't.
I'll give you the official response as soon as we can possibly get it out.
Thank you for that. Okay.
Okay. Thank you all. That concludes today's press conference and today's agenda meeting. Good afternoon.